Right in my bedroom. This was quite easily the closest I've ever come to cardiac arrest. And considering some of the depressions I've had, that's saying a bit. I'm pretty new to Reddit, to be honest, but as a warning, I like to write and descriptively. If you're looking for a quick turn in the sack, keep moving. In mid-2004, I'd become newly separated from my wife, and decided a getaway and career change were in order. Call it a geographical cure if you will, but that's a story for another time. I decided to move to a complete 1,000 miles from my home to attend a quick 4-month continuing education course in industrial radiography and ultrasonics in Calgary, Alberta. I'd fare well in the course, and due to the oil boom happening in North America at the time, I was literally hired by a large company waiting outside the doors as we graduated from our educational endeavors. Taking the job entailed moving a further 800 miles in the north of Canada to be based out of a small town which serviced the surrounding oil fields. I had no idea what the place would be like and what I'd be in store for. At the time, the north of the Canadian prairies had taken all the influx of workers that it could, and infrastructure didn't really grow with the boom. Trying to find a place to live up there was next to impossible. I'm not at all stretching the truth when I say that people were renting their balconies for people to pitch their tents on in a couple of places. I kid you not. Some of the places that ended up being rented out weren't really even fit for human habitation. This was the Black Gold Rush. I overstayed my company chit in a hotel that they put me up in for a month and was told that I had to find a place to live. It was absolutely next to impossible to find accommodations for a few reasons. I was working between 12 to 20 hours days, and the vacancy rate was less than 0%. I decided to look at some outlying communities. I asked for a day off and ended up driving about an hour from our office and found a small farming community. I use the word community loosely. This was a spattering of easily 60 to 100-year-old dilapidated houses centered around a greasy main street. Liquor store doubled as a post office, bar doubled as a hotel, and the grocery store looked and smelled of slaughterhouse that could have been condemned. Wild West shit. I drove by an old house that had been obviously divided into several apartments, and almost couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the orange and black "For Rent" sign screaming out at me. My heart did sink a bit. The place was clapboard, and the kind of dirty you can see before you even get out of your truck. At this point, after about a month of brutality on the pipelines of Alberta, I was exhausted and simply did not care. It was irony abound. I was making wicked money and could have afforded an uptown place, but because of the boom, I was going to be forced to live in a fucking ditch. Great again. I digress. I ended up taking an apartment in this building. That's an abuse of the word apartment. This was a dive. Beyond dives. They say that Alberta is rat-free, but I can testify that the statement is a crock of shit. And I don't just mean like the variety of rodents that people living in this building could easily have qualified. It's something that crawled from the oil and grease-laden hulls of a ship, straight up the steps and into a pile of meth on a cheap fucking kitchen table. The place itself was enough, but I could easily have said, let's not meet. Carpets were once gray were now an indescribable clay color. Dirt rubbed into dirt into on sale, off-tint paint, carelessly rubbing all over the place with a $1 brush, and the smell. Think of unwashed hair, wrapped around raw vegetables that have been thrown into a wet paper bag, and you're getting somewhere close. After sighing loudly and handing $2 over to the landlord in cash, I took the place. Didn't have a choice. Besides being exhausted, I know I'd not get another day off, and I was right. I worked from July to December 24th without a day off, barring the day I procured my glorious abode. I had arranged beforehand to get a bed from Sears that morning, and had it in the back of my truck. I dragged the queen mattress across that bathroom of a kitchen floor into a place that had been divided off by 16-inch wood panel into a bedroom. Now, for the next 9 months, this would be my home. If the grubby kitchen table and one chair that were sitting in the place wouldn't have been included, the only thing in the place would have been that bed. That would be it. Except for my alarm clock on the floor. Get up at 4 a.m., drive, work like coal miner until sunset, drive, drink whiskey, drop on bed in coveralls, rinse, repeat for hundreds of days. Literally. Then, One Friday evening in October, I'd come home after a particularly brutal day of dragging my ass through the mud. My feet finally hit my kitchen floor at around 11 at night, and I was in a mood. I sat down at that pissant kitchen table in my fire-retardant overalls, covered in mud past my waist. I don't know if you ever worked these kinds of hours in these kinds of conditions, but after a while, you just stop caring about anything. I sat there and downed about a half pint of whiskey in a quarter pint of time, and smoked cigarette after cigarette, lit each one off the bastard with the last one I'd smoked. I knew I was in trouble with the drinking and smoking, but as with most things, I didn't give a shit. I become married again, married to work, married to the mud, married to the oil, married to the welding, the pipe, and married to the hours that turned me as dirty as the place I inhabited. After I finishing hating on my body for about an hour, I noticed it was past midnight, and I knew I'd have to be up in 6 hours. That was considered our day off up there, not working until 8 a.m. on the weekends. I crashed down on my bed, coverall still wrapped around my waist, commando underneath, the rust scraper I carried to remove scale from welds before I x-rayed them still in my side pocket, reached over and clicked on the alarm button with a sigh. I remember thinking that I was pretty sure that none of it was worth the money. I was a shell of a human being. In those days, I'd often drift in and out of consciousness while trying to sleep. I'd be buzzed, overtired, and really just resting until the next onslaught of hundreds of welds. I remember that night hearing a fair amount of scratching in the kitchen, just past the partition that made the door to my room. At one point, I think I took exception to it and grumbled a bit at it. The mice, rats, and roaches were louder than usual. Who knew what the fuck the crackheads were doing next door tonight? Then I remember drifting off into a numbed, half-dreaming state. The scratching had stopped. I hadn't been late in months, and started in a semi-dream about a woman I'd seen earlier at a gas station, one of the nameless towns we passed through as crew. Then I saw her shadowy form at the foot of my bed, and I smiled. Then, as my eyes slowly registered, half opened, I realized I was no longer dreaming, and that it wasn't a her, and that he was breathing loud. He was standing at the foot of my bed, and as I froze in terror for what seemed to be 15 seconds, he grabbed my foot. "Yes!" He breathed out at me in a slurred, throated pitch that brought up with a smell of a chemical that managed to overshadow both the whiskey on my breath and the awful smell that was the atmosphere I lived in. Now, I'm not a huge guy, but I get all kinds of freaked out. I'm fairly strong. I remember not even thinking, just reacting. I pulled a scrapper from my side pocket and launched myself, rolling sideways off the bed, wrenching my foot from his grip. I don't think I'd even hit the ground before I was on my feet, and I swung hard. I not only felt skull when that scrapper connected the front of his head, but I heard it scrape across that shadow. The next blur would have been comedic relief, had the situation not been what it was. He howled in pain and almost in a hurt feelings kind of way, because I was still half drunk, and I launched myself at him like a linebacker practicing on the full height tackle. My head went straight into the goddamn wall near the edge of my door and sent me back straight onto the bed. I hit fucking hard, whilst hyper-intelligently yelling, "Gah!" I remember the sound of my scraper hitting the floor, the kitchen floor, with a shitty sounding clang. I remember the bright flash as I fell backwards, and right before I lost consciousness, I remember thinking, "Oh fuck, he's got me." I passed out. Now, when I came to, I don't really know how much time had passed. I honestly came back slowly. But as soon as I remember what was going on, I made an attempt to leap back to my feet. And dizzy as a dog that's been beating, I fell sideways onto my left arm, and it crunched under my weight. I remember screaming, "Fuck! Fuck! Fuck! Motherfucker!" as loud as I could, before I got back up and charged into the kitchen. I slammed the heel of my hand into the wall where the light switch was, flooding the greasy yellow light over the mess that was my kitchen. The front door was wide open. I was standing in blood, and no one was there. I remember hearing scurrying behind the door across the hall from me, like someone was trying to figure out what was going on in this whole shithole apartment. I had a few lengths of pipe in the kitchen. There were 2 to 4 inch pieces of pipe cutouts, but wielded together as test wheels. I brought them home as examples of weld defects to study. I grabbed a 2-inch diameter sample of pipe that was about 3 feet long and ran at my front door. No one there. I don't know how long I was out for in the bedroom, but as the realization that the intruder had fled crept onto me, so too did the adrenaline leave me. I began shaking, dropping the pipe, and sat down on the floor right in my doorway. The chick who was living across the hall opened her door and asked me if I was okay. I sat there, bare-chested, with muddy coveralls up to my waist, curly hair turned into Jimi Hendrix on a bad night, with blood from my forehead running across my face. I'm sure I absolutely stunk, and stunk of the whiskey that had fucked me into my doorway. It was probably a classic YouTube moment, as Jack Nicholson, looked up at her with a pointy eyebrows and sarcastically drawled out at her, "Does it look like I'm the fuck okay?" She just slowly closed her door, and probably figured I was just another oil field crackhead who'd gone off the rails for another holiday. From what I saw then, really bothered me, almost more than the intrusion. The entire outer door frame had been removed from the outside of my entrance door. The guy had worked hard to get in there. He wanted in. He wanted in, quietly. And whoever Lisa was, I'm certain that he hadn't intended her much good. Oddly, I remember feeling more nauseous about whoever that was raping and doing God knows what to a stranger named Lisa than I felt about the actual situation, the actual intrusion. I stood up, closed the door, and picked up the overturned kitchen chair, flunking down into it. Then I almost puked across the kitchen table, and whatever drunk there was left in me suddenly dissipated. For one of the few times in my life I felt genuinely frightened, and I do not frighten easily. I remember waiting a while before I called the cops. At that time, the RCMP were often few in numbers and overworked in those remote areas. They never even showed up until hours late, explaining that since I told them that he was no longer there, they felt I was safe. Later, when I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, face bloodied, left arm screaming in pain, someone else's blood on my hand, I remember wiping my hand across the mirror to try to get some of the grunge off the glass. I sat there and stared at the blood I left on the mirror for a good 10 minutes, and decided that my time in that town was over. Called my boss when the sun came up and told him he'd either be putting me back up in the hotel, or I was driving the fuck south, and he could hire whatever deranged goddamn crackhead he wanted. He agreed after I explained the night, and so came the end of my tenure in Hines Creek. So you, meth head son of a bitch, let's not meet, not in the dark in the middle of the night while I'm sleeping anyways. But by all means, come on by while I'm awake, motherfucker. Lock your doors at night, call police when you think you should, especially if you're a woman. Take this kind of shit seriously. Creeper in the Woods. So let me start off with a little background information. I am 14-year-old male, and this happened around a year ago. This story is nothing but the truth. Me and my grandparents are extremely close, and have been all my life. So my grandfather is an outdoorsy, get-off-your-phone kind of guy, and he pitched the idea to go camping in early August 2017. I was kind of excited, honestly, because I don't get outside as often as I should, and I figured it would be some quality time with him. Now that being said, we weren't going true camping. He wanted to go into the woods. I told him about a nearby campground we would go to. He was still thrilled, so we embarked on our weekend journey. Let me paint you a picture. Our campsite was a dead end aside from the one next to ours. It was right near the lake. It was beautiful, but to our dismay, we had people right beside us. We did all the camping things, made a fire, swimming, and even the infamous spooky stories around the campfire stuff. We hit the sack at around 10 p.m. because there was not much else left to do. As soon as my head hit the pillow, it started. The crunching of leaves on our campsite. We thought nothing of it at the time because the night was still young. Some assholes were setting off fireworks, and others were having a raging party. Hell, even our neighbor were still laughing. I fell asleep for a while. 11 p.m. is when it started to get weird. The party was still on, but our neighbor shut up. So the crunching of leaves didn't make sense. It was consistent, so my guess is the noise was footsteps. No one needed to be on our campsite, so falling asleep was a slightly bigger challenge. My grandpa seemed to be having an even harder time, as he seemed to be on alert mode. Yes, I know, we are both paranoid, but I feel like that paranoia keeps us safe. I wake up and check my watch, 12 a.m. it reads. It's starting to rain. The water is splashing against the rocks, and the thunder in the distance is quiet enough to sleep with. Even over the sound of rain pattering against our tarp, I can still hear the fucking footsteps. The unsettling nature of the situation starts to eat away at me. I wasn't scared, just creeped out. Sleep overcame me, but it didn't come easy. My grandpa finally slept too. A crack of thunder woke me again. Full-blown thunderstorm now. I felt relieved as I thought the footsteps stopped, until I heard the thump of wood. I don't know what the person did, but I heard 2 very loud knocks, followed by 2 large splashes. Fuck this, was my only thought, as the footsteps continued around our campsite. At the moment, I stayed still for 2 hours. 5 a.m. daybreak was near, but my heart was nearly exploded when I heard someone fumbling with the tent zipper and the fabric. I say the outline of three fingers being dragged across the tent. My body shut down as I came closer and stopped when the fabric brushed against my head. Every nerve in my body told me to scream, but I didn't. The hand trailed away and became quieter as I left our campsite. I woke my grandfather as soon as the sun came up. Before we left, I went to investigate our site. Lots of the ground was turned into mud in the storm, so the massive boot prints were easily noticeable. Easy to say, we dipped the fuck out after that. And that was it. Nothing ever became of it, aside from the story I can share. Me and my grandpa don't talk about it, and if anything, it's brought us closer together. Anyways, if the creepy camping site stalker who walked in circles around our campsite for 8 hours ever reads this, how about we never meet again? You can stay in the car. From the ages of about 2 to 10, I spent nearly every weekend with my sweet grandmother. Grandma's house wasn't bad to me. I found the overgrowth charming and the neighborhood she lived in fun because of the eccentric people. Naturally, I didn't realize until I was much older that Grandma lived in the ghetto of town, possibly one of the worst. She would take me with her to go on errands and to eat, and I was always happy to do so. One day at age 4, Grandma had told me that she had to go to the store to get a single thing, an ingredient she was missing for dinner. The nearest large market was just down the road. It was a Handy Andy, big for the small strip mall it was contained within. I went with Grandma in her silver Saturn. The seatbelt pressed me firmly into the passenger seat. When we arrived at the store, Grandma decided that she didn't need to park. She told me that she'd be back in just a second, and if I could just wait for her in the car. Grandma parked the car at the very front of the store and locked me in there, then left to fetch what she'd come for. A minute into her leaving, little me turns to see someone running at the passenger side door. It was the middle of the day, the sun was hot, and the sky was clear enough to where it shone everywhere. A skinny Hispanic man, his curly, wispy beard all over the place, had nearly thrown himself at the door and started to pull on the handle, trying desperately to get inside. I didn't know how to react. I only stared at him. When he realized that there was no way for him to get in, he looked up and we met eyes. Immediately he began smiling and started gesturing to lock on my side, trying to bid me to unlock the door, nodding and smiling. I may have been 4 years old, but I wasn't a fucking idiot. I just felt wrong, no matter how nicely this guy was smiling at me. I could only gently shake my head, all the while with him pulling at the handle, pleading with me silently to open the door. Grandma came out and saw him. I never heard her so fiercely scream at someone. He darted off. Grandma didn't speak the entire ride home. I wonder what might have happened if I unlocked the door. Handy Andy parking lot stranger, let's never, ever meet again.